Omer Rabba Barba Chana. We've reached by Rabba Barba Chana. One time we were out at sea on a boat. And we saw a big fish. We saw a fish. We were aware that it was a fish at the time that we saw it. Seemingly. That's the simple meaning of the words. We saw a big fish. The Yasiv Lechalsa Agbe. And what was on this big fish? There was sand on its back, and there was plants on its back. It was like a fish sticking out of the water. It's got some schmutz on it. This is the stuff that's in the water, right? And therefore, Savrinin Yavashtahu, so he thought it was dry? Because it had some dirt on the fish, so we thought it was dry? Salkinin, and not only they thought that, Salkinin, the Finin, the Vishlinin Agave. We went up there, we went on this fish, and it says in the commentary of Rabbeinu Shmuel that Iye Hayami, when it says they thought it was dry, it means they thought it was like an island. Oh, well, I thought it was a fish before. Now that I notice it's dirty, it must be an island. It's a strange story. So we went up there and we started making lunch. We started cooking food. We made a fire. And then we realized it really was a fish. It felt the hot fire on its back and it flipped over. What are you guys doing up there? And if it wasn't that our boat was right nearby, we would have drowned. This is the story that Rabbi Nachman is coming to explain. And besides for the fantastical nature of it, that's not so hard to just take it at face value, right? Okay, so you saw a flying fish. In this case, it's not a flying fish. That's a different story. It's just a big fish. This story is not even so fantastical, really. There are fish that are large enough that they could be the land mass that humans could go up there and make lunch. What stands out to me as the question is, really? You're telling me that they saw this big fish in the sea and then they somehow got it in their heads that this was an island because there's sand on there? So, there's a klal in Likutei Moharan. The first 16 or 17, I think it's 16, Likutei Moharans are based on the stories of Rabba Bar Chana. And Rabba Bar Chana famously came to Rabbi Nachman in a dream. Keep in mind, these two men lived 1,500 to 1,700 years apart from each other, so it was a long time later he came to him in a dream, and Rabbi Bar Chana, he didn't look too pleased, and he said to Rabbi Nachman, all this time has passed and nobody's explained my stories, and so I need you to do it. So I'll come and I'll help you, and I'll tell you the stories firsthand, not just that in the Gemara it's very kitzer, it's written in a very brief way. Now, one question you might have on that story is, well, isn't there an explanation of the Marsha? Marsha was one of the famous commentators of the Gemara that would comment especially on the stories, the strange stories in the Gemara. We don't see him so much show up in legal writings, even though he did have laws that he's mostly famous for his writings on the stories. He was heavily involved with the production of the Ein Yaakov book, which is the stories from the Gemara with additional commentaries, and the Marsha is like one of the stars of that book there. So the Marsha explains the story. So what do you mean it hasn't been explained? So how does he explain this strange question? Why did they think it was a fish? So he says, it was a fish. Why did they think it was an island? So he says, the fish is the mazel of the month of Adar. It's the constellation that corresponds with the month of Adar. The stars were shaped in some sort of fish shape during that time. So what's going on in the month of Adar? Well, it's a turning point. The month before it was rainy, and going forward it's going to be sunny. And he likens this to Galus and Geula. So they saw this island and they thought it was going to be Geula. Also because Nisan is right after. It's one of the laws of Adar that Purim has to be connected with Pesach, has to be connected to Nisan. That's why we do, when there's two Adars, which maybe we'll get to discussing that today, and you do Purim in the second one specifically, so it's close to Nisan, which is when Geula. That's Yetzias Mitzrayim, so that's Geula. So they were so excited about it being Adar, and they thought, oh, well, it must be going into Geula Shlema here, because this fish is the Mazel of Adar, so that's why they made this mistake. By the way, the fact that it says in the Gemara that they saw dirt on the back of it, and therefore they thought it was dry. If they thought it was an island, why doesn't the Talmud say that? It says that it was dry. So the Marsha's explanation is that because they were going into the sunny season, which would represent Geula, and also that's what dry really means. Okay, so the story just got a lot stranger. Let's take him at face value. Let's say this touched out story way. So you're telling me they saw a fish, and it was a dirty fish, and therefore we think it's an island. That's strange enough. But now his explanation is, we saw a fish, and we thought it was a metaphorical fish. So we made the major life decision to park our boat on this fish, and get out in the middle of the sea, and get out on top of this fish and start making a fire, because we thought it was a metaphorical fish. How does this happen? How does this thinking error happen? Does someone see something real and they think that it's imaginary, or it's merely symbolic, perhaps, or the other way you could say that someone has something imaginary and they think that it's real? This confusion in general of imagination and reality, both of which are very useful, because imagination, Rabbi Nachman says, if we're sad, we can borrow happiness from the future. We think about things that have not occurred but would make us greatly happy if they did occur. And it makes us have a happy feeling, and that's good for us. It's good. It can be healthy and productive simply to have a happy feeling alone, right? Even if it isn't grounded in reality. So imagination is very useful. Rabbi Nachman says if we want to pray in an excited, energetic way, as we've discussed the importance of that in this Torah early on, we can imagine that we're doing so, and that will help us to actually do so. So imagination is tremendously useful. So is reality. I don't think anyone had a question about that. Problem is when you mix the two of them up. How does that happen? So now we can perhaps understand why Rabba Bar Chana came to Rabbi Nachman in a dream and said, nobody's explaining my stories. Okay, so we have an excellent explanation. The Marsha is one of the greatest of all time in explaining these stories. And his explanation is very thorough, and every detail of his story is explained its significance. And so you could say, okay, I understand how the story goes now, call it a day. Except that it leaves us with this breathtaking question: how do people get into this mixing up reality and imagination? So the rest of this Likutei Moharan, one way to read it is to say that we're going to take the concepts we've discussed and you're going to re-explain this story as intermingled with those concepts in a way that it should answer that question and any other groundbreaking questions that you'll have as a result of this story. One other thing to say about this question, though, is that I'm bolstering up my question, though, as though is this fantastic question: how do people mix up reality and imagination? Although, if we think about day-to-day life, it's not so strange of a question, really. People get upset about things all the time that are not. They didn't even get the story right. They get excited about things all the time. They didn't even get the story right. They have some version out in their head. This could be interpersonal things. It could be, man, that guy's such a jerk. He must, have a bad personality, and then they're upset about that. Actually, we don't know the story at all. We don't know 99.99% of what's going on in that guy's day, and even our own day, really, that caused that effect. And anybody can really deny that, right? We just have sort of a working model of reality, but nobody's to say that it's really so right. Another really good example would be the news. Anybody that follows the news and has any sort of emotional reaction to it, if they didn't go to journalism school, they're not even qualified to assemble the meta-research that would be required to get any sort of real shot on what's really happening. So in other words, most of it is imagination. Most of the story of what's going on in the world that they have a certain emotion about is imagination. So, it's not that strange of a question. How do people mix up imagination and reality? If it was entirely imagined in their head, then they wouldn't get excited about it so much. The television show is entertainment. But they do. People do have real feelings about what they think is going on in the real world. They know that their understanding is incomprehensive. And I think they probably have some idea of the extent to which it is so, but there's this thing that happens that people mix up reality with imagination. but it's not so strange. Okay, so then you could say, well, that doesn't really make the story any better with the boat and the fish and the metaphorical fish. Because maybe I watch the news and I get some idea about it, and I know it's not so correct, my idea, but I have a strong emotion about it anyway. But I don't make major life decisions based on that stuff. Like, okay, I go with a certain feeling and then I buy the same house I would have bought if I had a better, more productive emotion. Right? It doesn't change where I choose to live. It doesn't choose what job I choose to get, who I choose to marry, things like that. Really just how kind of an emotion I feel. So if I was on a boat and I was like, I have to find an actually safe place. I'm not getting off this boat in the middle of the ocean if I don't find a really, really safe place. I'd make good and sure that was actually an island and not a fish. Especially before I start cooking my lunch on there, making a fire on there. It doesn't really seem to answer the question. So it's a more profound question. How do people come to use imagination, have some sort of imagined version of reality, and then make major life decisions based upon that? But it's not really so strange of a question. What happens? So the Zohar explains that we got two brains. We have the brain in our head and we have the brain in our gut. And they have names. Brain in our head is called the Yetzer Tov, and the brain in our gut is the Yetzer Hara. So following the gut advice? No, leading the gut. That's what we try to do in the Yiddishkeit, not following the gut. Chas v'shalom. So, but the gut brain is, why is it called a brain? Because it's capable of producing thoughts. And so what will happen is that a person will have an emotion, which is a guttural experience, or they'll have some sort of leaning, a bias about something. It could even be just a desire for any material thing, any person, they have a desire for something like that. And then they will start to build mental constructs upon this. Essentially non-information, essentially emotional thing that is not, we have no way of determining if this is good or bad information that we're getting these thoughts from. So it's not really so strange. There are probably actually still people in the world that base their life decisions on astrology. That probably still exists. And all sorts of equally efficacious, equally preposterous things. By the way, the Ramban says that astrology is a legitimate thing. The issue is to get any sort of legitimate information from it, you would have to know exactly what second you were born to get your chart, and exactly what millimeter of space you were in. Because if you were a couple seconds off, you could totally change your whole chart around. If you actually are taking a full picture of the stars, at least according to what they could tell, and a lot of these guys had telescopes and stuff, and they could make real fancy calendars out many, many years in advance. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, when he was a little kid, he made a 500-year calendar. He didn't have the internet. He had a telescope and some old books. Maybe he had a telescope. Definitely had some old books. So these guys knew what was going on in outer space. They could make predictive calls based on what was going on in outer space. And so this is the Ramban thing. So it's not so strange of a situation, but so I guess it's not that strange of a question, but it is a very poignant question, because now it's a thing we can all look at our lives and see how we do. And so you can understand why Rabba Bar Chana wanted Rabbi Nachman to explain these stories more. The laws in the Talmud are very extensively discussed. The stories not as much. So it's not that there's Chas v'shalom said anything wrong with the Marsha's explanation. It was exactly the step that needed to happen at that time to uncover the story for us more. It's just that he's like the only guy that did it at his time. There's not loads of explanations and loads of discussion between the rabbis where we can kind of sort of climb the ladder to heaven in the studious way and find really the truth of the truth of the truth of the truth here, right? We have truth, but we need more truth of truth of truth of truth. So Rabbi Nachman comes to explain. Now, even though the explanation of the Marsha is not brought in this Likutei Moharan, he does not explicitly reference it, and interestingly, it does not seem to be brought in this I have a fancy Likutei Moharan that has many sources brought to it, and it doesn't seem to be brought in there. And I do have a teretz that I don't think we're going to get to today, but we will get to hopefully in the next couple of sessions on why that might be, that they did not mention explicitly the commentary of the Marsha. Although one of the rules of Likutei Moharan is that Rabbi Nachman accounts for all available information. It's like the efficient market hypothesis. The cost of the water bottle is correct. If you think it's high, you think it's low, there's information you're not accounting for in the marketplace, right? If you really knew everything in the marketplace, it would converge all in one place that the price of the water bottle is 7 shekels, and that's the correct price of the water bottle according to all the information, right? So the Likutei Moharan Lahavdil. We can say that he accounts for all of the information, at the very least, that has been said up until his time, and there are many of those who say, and you can find support for them saying that in allusions in the text, even commentaries that had not yet at that time been written. So there are a few hints to this explanation of the Marsha in the text of Likutei Moharan surrounding where Rabbi Nachman brings the story. And I'm going to point those out, and perhaps also we will, in the process of doing so, glean some additional information to sort of round out how we're going to go forward. What's the question? What are we trying to answer? What do we reckon with going forward? So, one of the things worthy of mention, that the fish is the mazel of Adar. That this is what the Marsha brings. And of course, it's well known that I mentioned it even earlier. There can be 1 or 2 Adar. And so why does the Marsha say that Adar is going into a time of Geula? It isn't only because of the sunny season, it's because of Nisan. Nisan specifically. And so it's in the Mishnah. If you have 1 Adar and then they add another Adar, while you're still in the first Adar, then you read the Megillah again. It's a conversation. What's the ruling of that? It's a conversation in the Gemara how that goes exactly. But that could happen. It could be Adar. I mean, these days it can't, but because these days we have a calendar that's based on math. But in the olden times and the should be soon again times of the Beis Hamikdash, when you had a functioning Sanhedrin, even a little bit after the Beis Hamikdash, they would base it not off a mathematical calculation, but off of the testimony of witnesses who would report when they saw the moon. And for the heavens, this is more valuable than the calculation. We see many things like this in the Torah. There is a conversation in checking a Sefer Torah if you can use a computer to do it, because wouldn't that do a better job than a human? And yeah, seemingly it sure would. So practically what we were told is that they do actually run it through a computer, because then the human sofer knows to check all the spots that the computer mentioned. They might be fine, they might not be fine. We do not take the pesachim of the computer, however, and the reason for that is that they wanted to really make sure the computer was right when they were considering this, can we take the pesachim of the computer question. And eventually they looked and they found that it added a little pixel that connected 2 letters and was possible to say for Torah. Because if 2 letters are touching, then that would be a problem. Yeah, but if the sofer actually looked at it just with his eye with a magnifying glass, which is still considered like the naked eye basically, because glasses are like a magnifying glass, I think is the reason. It turned out it was actually fine. There was not actually, it was basically the computer had an optical illusion. There was a conversation about bugs in the water in New York City, and it's a long conversation, but one of the major details was, because if there's bugs, Jews can't eat bugs, right? So we'd have to do something about water filtration, which is complex on Shabbos. Anyway, one of the major details was the size of the bugs. From an esrog, if there is a piece missing in an esrog, then it's a problem. But if you cannot see the missing chunk with a magnifying glass and no more, it's fine. Even if you have a microscope and you see a missing piece, no problem. Only a magnifying glass. Human testimony is more important to the heavens, to Hashem, than a mathematical calculation. There's even in the Gemara there it brings that some of our neighboring countries were actually better at math than we were. Just straightforward, better at math, better telescopes. They were better at modeling the motion of the stars and things like that, and predicting positions of things. And they'd argue with us sometimes. Listen, the moon is coming at a different time than you think it's going to come. And we have a pretty good track record here. We can re-explain all your stuff, so I think you're going to be wrong. We'll see in a couple of days, but I think you're going to be wrong. And then the testimony from the witnesses would come, and it turns out the Beis Din of the Jews was right, even though the math wasn't as good. The Kedushas Levi explains that, that's because Hashem changed it to go with the Beis Din, because the human calculation was more valuable. There can be two Adars, and it used to be that we would add this by decision of the Beis Din. Nowadays it's based on math, so we don't have the surprise second Adar thing. I don't think it could happen in these days until we have a Sanhedrin that can accept this sort of testimony. Then they will also have the power to add. You could basically say that the mistake that happened according to the explanation of the Marsha, they said that it's Adar, so Nisan's coming, so that means this must be Geula, and what we actually see is our eyes deceiving us, and so our imagined perception that it's Geula times is going to replace, but there were actually two Adars that year. And that's all it was. So that is called Shnase Ibor. When the Beis Din adds a month of Adar, they impregnate, so to speak. They add an extra month inside of the year. And so Ibor also, Rabbi Nachman discusses this on the previous page, when we were discussing the concept of that we go up to the city of Mishpat with our prayers, and then we issue rulings in Halacha in that place, that we by doing so we can bring the souls that we're praying for with us to a special place called Ibor, where they will receive rejuvenation. They will receive, essentially what that means in our Torah is new sets of emotions sent to them from sort of the emotional broadcast zone of the universe that will be more helpful for them in their life. And then this is a way of at least bringing about a better world if everybody had more helpful emotions. So something was not being accounted for here, this thing of Ibor. One of the concepts that we've discussed is that when we reach this high place in heaven called Mishpat with our prayers, it's not enough that we do that, but we have to learn Halacha in depth. Because when we're there, we're going to have to issue rulings in order to bring people to this place called Ibor. Because if they had accounted for the fact that it was the second Adar, then maybe they wouldn't have gotten on that. They wouldn't almost got drowned at sea there. Another thing you could say is, if it was actually the second Adar, then they would have been right, and it would have been Geula Shlema. So at the very least, not drowning is contingent upon this piece of information, how many Adars are there, and it could possibly be the salvation of the entire world and bring into a golden age. So it's an important matter, one way or another. And there is a Chazal, and I don't know where it is, unfortunately, that says that the Iker Halacha, I know that it's brought in Shir and Rabba, but it's not, I don't think it's the original location. I think it's Baraisa or something that says it's older. It says the Iker Halacha, the main laws are, one of the laws of small bird sacrifices, which are very complex, and also the laws of adding a month of Adar to the year. The Shnase Ibor, being Maver the Chana, is a central pillar of Halacha. So it's very clearly an allusion to the learning of Halacha, as well as that this issue of the Adar mix-up, which Adar was it, is not only we have to arrive, but we have to paskin there. This is the second Adar, is that we have to paskin to get there. I was asked a question recently, and there's a bacher, I won't share any names. I hope he doesn't mind them sharing the story, but I'm allowed to do it because I'm not sharing any names. He had a background in meditative practices from various peoples and the wise of various locations. And one of the things that they do is that they reach a certain state and that they hold in that state for a long time. They're very I've even seen videos where these guys will sit there with a brain scanner and they can make it do like tricks. They mean like, I'm going to go into this mindset, and it does like holds there for a long time. They go do another one, right? They go back and forth. They have very good control of going to these places. So we were just talking about, well, in prayer, yes, you can reach these places. There are very kosher meditations too. We're also can reach these places. So he asked me, so what does learning Talmud have to do with that? I like that. That seems like a real connection with God to me. I feel I'm connected with God when I go to these places. He does kosher stuff now. He sees in a sefer, he says there's ahavas v'tainugim, and he reads about what the author of the sefer says, that emotion, and he meditates on that. It's like, this is, okay. So how does that connect with learning Talmud? Okay, so you don't just feel someplace. You're actually going to a place. When you go to any state of a specific emotional state, you're going to a location in the spiritual worlds. When the Baal Shem Tov says, where your thoughts are, that's where you are, he's talking about like Jewish astral travel here, that you're actually going to a place. Don't think it's only imaginary that you're feeling this way. So what you do there matters. Now that you're in this place. And according to this Torah, it matters in a tremendous way, because let's say I go to a place of just like, use something general, ahava. I go to a place of love. I do a love meditation. Now, if I just sit there, what am I training the world to do? To be inactive in a state of love. I am broadcasting that love is twiddling your thumbs. If I learn the laws of what happens if two people's cows get in a fight, while I am in this state of love, if I spend my time in the details, now I'm adding love to all such situations. You could also say I'm adding that intelligence of settling disputes in a way that is fair to everyone to love. So that anybody that feels love, this will help them to settle disputes, which is very beneficial in a way that is beneficial and fair to all parties. And also that when people are settling disputes, that they will do so with the emotion of love, and they will be helped by this emotion. So when we go to these places, we are actually doing a tremendously important work. And actually, even with our learning, so then he asked me a great question. Well, so practically what? So I meditate to a certain place, and then I should open a sefer. So I need a 3-hour hakdam before I open any sort of sefer. No, there are times that we learn also. I have Talmud shir at 11 o'clock. I don't have time to meditate for 2 hours first. I have to go to Talmud shir. Rabbi Yolzach, my teacher, he taught about an avoida of opening the sefer. Before you open the book, just have in mind, what emotion am I going to have going into this? We actually had a list of approved emotions that are going to work really well, and that's those shirim you can find online, where I explain what he said about that. But it's a way of opening the sefer. So when I'm going to learn about the laws of if two people's cows get in a fight, what am I trying to fix in the world by doing that? Am I concerned about how people are with their emotion of love? Are people acting badly out of love? Or they're doing things that are important without love? So then, okay, I should think about love when I open the sefer to learn about cows fighting. Or perhaps I should be very detail-oriented. Maybe that's the emotion I'll go in with. We say when people are detail-oriented, they're not doing it in a way that is settling disputes. Or when people are settling disputes in the world, they're not detail-oriented about it enough. So then the Torah approach is, okay, so I'm going to learn the laws of settling disputes, and I'm going to, my avoid of opening the sefer will be, I will go to the land of detail orientation in this. Or it could be as I'm going to be in awe, as though the king is explaining it to me. And then you mix those two things. Now, we don't have to make a whole calculation. As we said before, we don't know everything that's happening in the world. We can't know. But we can deliberately choose a feeling we're going to go into the sefer with. And then the important part here that I think is being brought out by this allusion to the Marsha's explanation, that they made the mistake about it was Adar, and no, it's not just a symbolic fish; it's actually a real fish. But if they were right that it was a symbolic fish and it was going to Nisan, it would have been Geula. They should have known that law of the how to add whether there were 2 Adars that month, and that seemingly would have fixed the issue, which is called Shnasa Ibor. And Rabbi Nachman mentions Ibor, which is achieved by going to the elevated state and learning poiskim there. Okay. Oh, the button.